Hello my friends, I have made 1 year update video about the Panasonic S1 a couple of days ago, and as I have promised, today we will take a look at the comparison of Panasonic S1 and the GH5. Panasonic GH5 has been around for about 3 years, and as I've explained in my 2020 update video, I certainly don't think that it is outdated, just the opposite. Despite that, some GH5 users might be thinking about upgrading or switching to something. And the S1 seems like a pretty logical choice. It is made by a brand that they are familiar with, and the handling is somewhat similar. On the other hand, it is completely different mount and camera that follows very different philosophy. Both are designed as a tools in the first place, so neither is trying to be as small as possible, which they are not. The S1 is significantly larger and heavier camera. The difference is about 300 grams. The main difference in size will depend on the lenses, we will get to that later. The most obvious difference between the S1 and the GH5 is the sensor size. I have made multiple videos about comparing full frame and micro four thirds cameras, so here I will just sum up relative and absolute advantages of both. Full frame sensor can capture more light, so it is generally more suitable for low light and achieving shallow depth of field. That is relative and it depends on the lens that you are using. For example, this excellent 24-70mm f2.8 will provide all of that if you are willing to carry it around. Absolute advantages of full frame are higher dynamic range and lower pixel density at given resolution. That means that it provides more usable information for working with shadows and highlights. The dynamic range with the S1 sensor is excellent. You can push it very far even at higher ISO values. Lower pixel density at given resolution means that it is much easier to make lenses that are good enough for that sensor, because it won't scan the glass so precisely and it won't pick up the imperfections so easily. Relative advantage of the micro four thirds is the smaller size. Again, that depends on the lenses. If you decide to compensate smaller sensor size by using excellent 10-25mm f1.7 lens, you will indeed get full frame results, but also full frame size. Most micro four thirds lenses such as 12-35mm f2.8 are very small, but of course it is not the same thing as using 24-70mm f2.8 on full frame. An absolute advantage of micro four thirds is how it allows the manufacturer to build a camera around that sensor. It is smaller, much easier to stabilize, and it produces less heat. A big absolute advantage of IMX272 micro four thirds sensor in comparison with IMX410 sensor in the S1 is faster readout speed. It works with much less data, so it can output 60 frames per second using all pixels in 12-bit. IMX410 can only output 40 fps in 12-bit using all pixels. That is why Panasonic GH5 is still the only mirrorless camera that can shoot no crop 4K 60p using the whole sensor. Panasonic S1 and even S1H can only shoot 4K 60p with 1.5 times crop. Thanks to that readout speed, Panasonic GH5 also has less visible rolling shutter effect. There is almost none on the GH5, but it is not a major issue on the S1 either. On the other hand, the S1 sensor is probably backside illuminated, so besides having a larger area for capturing the light, it can also capture it a bit more efficiently. The S1 also has high resolution mode where it can shoot 96 megapixel stills when mounted on a tripod. This way it can capture great amount of detail and also dynamic range. Overall, the image quality in stills is better on the S1 because of the higher resolution and lower pixel density. The GH5 also has very good image quality, but that mostly depends on the lens that you use. So let's take a look at the video specs. Let's assume that both cameras will have activated software keys for additional video features. In that case, both can shoot full sensor 4K 10-bit 422 up to 30 frames per second. Both can also shoot 4K up to 60p in 8-bit internally. As I mentioned, there is 1.5 times crop on the S1. Both can also shoot 4K 60p in 10-bit externally. The GH5 can also shoot all intra at 400 megabits per second and 4K DCI, but only in 24p. The S1 is probably a tiny bit better because of the higher downsampling rate, but in the good light, both will provide excellent video quality. Regarding the color management, you have plenty of options on both. For out-of-the-camera colors, I like 709 and natural, but I am not a fan of standard picture style. An advantage of the S1 is flat picture profile, which works very well with 10-bit footage. I really like these semi-flat profiles, they are much easier to work with in comparison with log profiles. They can also capture enough of dynamic range in most situations. On the GH5, I use customized Cine-like D picture style, which also works pretty well. Regarding the V-Log, both cameras can shoot V-Log with paid firmware update. The V-Log is better on the S1. It uses the full version of V-Log from VeriCam line. It is really great and it captures a ton of dynamic range. Because the long GOP on Panasonic is great, even 100 megabits per second codec provides very robust files. The V-Log L on the GH5 is still very good. It definitely helps you capture more dynamic range in situations such as this sunset scene. The GH5 has higher noise floor at the base ISO, so you can't push it quite as far. It is much less forgiving than Cine-like D, for example, but if you use it in a good light conditions and expose it properly, you will get incredible results in combination with 10-bit 422 footage. Regarding the autofocus, Panasonic GH5 is significantly better. It actually has very good autofocus with firmware 2.6. The responsiveness and the speed is not a problem at all. I would say that the main thing that separates it from face detection systems is just that slight back and forth movement when focusing from very close distance to infinity. In reasonable situations, it is more than sufficient. On the S1 it is not that great, but it is still sufficient for a majority of sensible use cases. In more difficult situations, it may struggle with the responsiveness and hunt a bit. It probably comes down to that sensor readout speed again. Panasonic's DFD system requires a lot of processing power and readout speed, which is why the GH5 has a much easier job. It would be great if the autofocus system on the S1 was as good as on the GH5, but I am not sure if that is possible. For the time being, the GH5 definitely beats the S1 in this category. As I've said, if Sony a7 III autofocus is 10 out of 10, I would give the GH5 with firmware 2.6 very solid 8.3, and I would give the S1 7 out of 10, which is still not bad. The in-body image stabilization is a signature feature of Panasonic, and it is indeed great on both cameras. Both are more than sufficient for handheld shots or panning. The S1 is probably a little bit better, which might be also caused by the extra weight, which adds more stability. The real deal with both is the dual IS. I especially love that with long telephoto lenses. Being able to get super sharp shots and 1/20th of the second at 200mm is great. The image stabilization also helps a lot when you are using the gimbal. I actually use the Weebill S for both S1 and the GH5. Mainly with ultra-wide zooms. The in-body image stabilization can take care of smaller shaking, while the gimbal will smooth out larger movements. Both are great cameras for gimbal use thanks to that in-body image stabilization. Regarding the screen and the viewfinder, GH5 viewfinder has 3.69 million dots and 0.78 times magnification. The display has 1.62 million dots and 3.2 inches. The viewfinder in the S1 has 5.68 million dot resolution and 0.78 times magnification. The screen has 2.1 million dots and 3.2 inch size. On the GH5, both viewfinder and display are great. I certainly don't have any complaints. Both the screen and the viewfinder on the S1 are the best available on the market, even a step above the GH5, so that is one of my most favorite things on the S1. GH5 can also shoot 9 frames per second with autofocus continuous, whereas the S1 can only shoot 6 frames per second with autofocus continuous. That makes the GH5 more suitable for fast action shooting together with better autofocus system. The S1 uses huge 3050 mAh battery. It has to power a lot of stuff such as the in-body image stabilization, high-resolution display and EVF, and so on. That means that the real-world battery life is actually better on the GH5. It only has 1860 mAh battery, but it still has much lower consumption. 2 batteries should be enough for a typical day of commercial shooting with the GH5. With the S1, I would bring at least 3 batteries. A big advantage of the S1 is that it can't be charged through USB-C even while it is being used. It also comes with USB-C charger in the box. GH5 cannot charge the batteries in camera. Maybe the biggest difference between these cameras is the lens selection. Most of Micro Four Thirds lenses are made to be a good compromise between the optical qualities and the size. Panasonic L-mount lenses are all about the optical qualities with adequate size and weight. Having said that, the f4 zooms are quite manageable. Especially the 16-35 f4 is quite small. 70-200mm f4 is also a great lens and not that huge. One Micro Four Thirds lens that is especially worth mentioning here is the Leica 10-25mm f1.7. That can largely compensate for that Micro Four Thirds sensor size by providing constant f1.7 aperture. 20-50mm full-frame equivalent field of view is also extremely useful, so that is one of my most favorite Micro Four Thirds lenses overall. Of course, it is not a small lens, so as I've said before, if you want full-frame performance, you have to accept full-frame size. 10-25 is actually a valid alternative to switching to full frame. To sum up, I will say that the Panasonic GH5 remains the more pragmatic option in my opinion. The S1 is currently more of an enthusiast option for early adopters, people who like Lumix cameras, and the idea of L-mount. Is the S1 full-frame GH5? Not quite. There are still some technical limitations, and because of those, we still can't have a complete no-compromise hybrid camera, especially when it comes to video. In some areas, the S1 comes close to being one. I would say that the most important specification for any hybrid camera at the moment is the sensor readout speed. That is what keeps the S1 from being the ultimate hybrid camera. Is it still a good camera? Yes, definitely. I really like to use it, it provides great output and user experience, apart from the size and associated inconveniences. If I had to choose one of these at the moment as my only all-round hybrid camera, it would still be the GH5. Of course, the Micro Four Thirds sensor is both advantage and limitation, but in my opinion, it is a complete camera within those limitations. Besides that, the options to compensate for that sensor size, such as the Leica 10-25mm f1.7, are better than ever before. The S1 certainly has some advantages, such as the low light performance and full V-lock. If those are important to you, it will be a great choice. I am definitely looking forward to seeing more S-line cameras. The L-mount is a long-term plan, and I think that we will see more L-mount cameras from Panasonic in foreseeable future. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share your opinion, please do so in the comment section, and see you next time.